Hello, friends. My name is Tiffany Babb, and this is the Interesting Jobs podcast, where I talk to people with interesting jobs about their day-to-day, popular misconceptions about their field, and what they wish more people understood about their jobs. Today, our very special guest is Katie Klim, who works for Macmillan. So, Katie, what do you do?
Hi, I am a book cover designer at Macmillan. I work for the Tor Publishing Group there. So I work on a lot of different genre books, romance, horror, sci-fi, fantasy. I get to work with a lot of artists and editors, and we make the final book covers that you see and hold in your hands.
So, when you say you're working with artists and editors, what does that process look like?
It's different for every title, which I guess is the fun part of my job. Nothing is ever the same. I work closely with our editorial team in-house. We are assigned seasonally, we're assigned a list to work on, and we work with editors to figure out what the hook of the story is, what they vision this cover looking like, what if the author has thoughts, what they would like to see or don't want to see. And we just kind of start from there. A lot of times I read the manuscript just to get a better feel for the story. And I would say the most important part of my job is getting the vibe of the book, because that's a lot of what the cover needs to offer without giving everything away. So I work with the editor, we develop a plan for the cover. We figure out if we want it to be made by an illustrator, if we want to use stock photos to build it and cobble something together. I work closely with Red Nose Studio a lot on TJ Klune covers, and he's physically building sets and then he shoots them. So a whole variety of artists that I get to work with, which is really cool. And it's people from all around the world, which is also really fun. And we work with artists. I work closely with them because while they're doing their bit to come up with the image and the composition, I'm trying to work in the type design along with that so that both elements shine. So in the background, I'm kind of looking at the sketches we're getting and starting to plan out what sort of typeface would go with the vibe of the art, with the story. We're also looking at the length of the title. We're looking at, is this a huge author? Like, is their name going to be really prominent on this cover and possibly bigger than the title or as big as the title? There's a lot to consider, and we go through sometimes many, many rounds of that. Sometimes we nail it right away. Sometimes we have months and months to build those covers. Sometimes it's a crash and you have like weeks to build a cover. It's really always different.
You mentioned you were looking at or considering different typefaces while the art's getting put together.
Mhm.
When you're considering them, are you just pulling them out of your brain? Are you going through catalogs? What does that look like?
We have a catalog that we own. I don't even know at this point what the count is. It's thousands of fonts at this point in our font library that we own the license to. So I'm going through that normally. Sometimes, if I'm not seeing that in our catalog, we can go look at other font foundries where they do design, and we can pick it out from there and buy a license for that new font. So that's always different. Sometimes I'm doing hand lettering and we're not using any of that. So it's really always different.
Mentioned you work in the Tor imprint. These are all genre books. Genre covers have a lot of conventions, right? Did you have to study, like, what does a sci-fi novel for this particular audience look like versus a sci-fi novel for a different kind of audience looks like?
Yes. But study, I mean, we're very visual people in my field, clearly. So we study by going to bookstores, by owning a lot of books. I think I treat my bookstore visits as kind of like reconnaissance. Like I'm always seeing what's being made now. The tricky thing with publishing and following trends, which sometimes you want to do, sometimes you don't want to do. Like if a book sold really, really well, sometimes it's good to comp to that cover and say, well, it lives in the same sort of universe, same section in the bookstore. So sometimes you want it to fit in well there. Sometimes you want it to really stand out. Sometimes the book is many different things, so you're trying to pull all those different genres together. I just designed a book that's dystopian, sci-fi, fantasy. So it was kind of pulling from all of those genres. But the tricky part with publishing is we are always working. I don't ever really know what year I'm living in because we're always working 2 years ahead and we're working seasonally. So right now I'm working on like a list of books that's coming out in the summer of 2027. So even if you do go to a bookstore now and you look at those covers, I'm already 2 years away from that. So you can like study and go with what has already been made, but at the same time you want something new and different because they're all new and different, unique stories. So you kind of visually pull from like general unsaid, unspoken rules and there's also new subgenres coming up all the time too. So that's always a fun opportunity to say like, well, what could this be? Like maybe we start the new look, the new trend.
What is your favorite genre to work in? Do you have one?
I don't know if I have one. When I first started in publishing, I worked in children's books. So that was middle grade books to YA books. So that's spanning a lot of years. But when I worked in that field, I tended to have a note I got a lot was that my covers were very dark, like, and creepy. And I just found that to be like the easiest and what I went towards. So I definitely really like designing for horror. I find that to be like very comfortable for me. But when I started working at Tor, I found it interesting that I feel like I've always read many different genres and I'm not tied to any specific one. But when I started working for our horror imprint, which is Nightfire, I realized that really do love horror. Like when it was said outright, I was like, oh, I'm such a wimp. I'm so scared of it. But I do really love like a certain type of horror. I really like the psychological aspect of it. I don't love body horror. I love ghost stories. So it's been a really cool time working with Tor because I'm figuring out like, yes, I do love fantasy. High fantasy is tough for me, but I love like magic and yeah, it's been really fun to play in all of the genres. And I do find my list is pretty mixed seasonally with a little bit of everything, which I really like.
What does your day to day look like?
Oh, well, I sit alone in my little cave and design. Um, Day to day, I also have ADHD, so I feel like I'm always trying to change what my day to day is because my brain is in 87 different things at once. Um, I'm also cycling through different points of book covers, so I'm working on a mechanical, which means laying out the actual jacket that will be printed. I'm designing a mechanical for one season. I'm building the cover for a different season. And I'm concepting and reading the manuscript for another season. So it's kind of mixing all of those things in to my day. And then answering emails and posting JPEGs and getting people supplies that they need of Photoshop files. Um, it's also doing research and finding new artists to work with because I'm always trying to expand our list in that way. Yeah, it's really always different.
You mentioned expanding your list by finding new artists. How are you doing that? Are you just looking online?
I'm looking online a lot. I'm trying to think of how else I'm doing it. I guess it is all online. I mean, it's also like visiting museums and being inspired by everything. When I was in college, I took a course. It was like one of the early courses that you had to take freshman year. And it was called Design Thinking. And it was just like how design is everywhere and everything out in the world is designed in a very specific way, but you don't necessarily think of it until you start to think of it. And then you can't unsee it. And it's kind of overwhelming how everything is so designed and how people interact with those designs. Like I remember an image of steps to a subway and there was gum lining this subway thing and it was because one person had interacted with that design space by putting their piece of chewed up gum there. And then like over years, it was just like plastered with gum. So it was like, yeah, that design seemed to be open for that for people to do. So yeah, it's everywhere and it's kind of overwhelming.
That's fascinating. So, how did you get into your field?
This sounds so corny. And now when I watch it and think about it, the premise of it is so problematic and weird. I really liked the movie You've Got Mail when I was younger, and that was all about, I mean, the subplot of it. It's really about New York, but and a love story, I guess. But it was people in publishing and writers and books. And I just knew I wanted to live within that world. And I got interested in graphic design really early on in high school. I was on the yearbook staff where I just kind of was in a closet all day teaching myself InDesign. And then I went to college and I stuck with graphic design, but college was very hard for me, which a late in life diagnosis of ADHD now tells me why it was so hard for me. So I never finished college, but I knew that while I was in college, book design was my goal. And at the time, the answer to like the next step was just move to New York. So I moved from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to New York. I got an internship at the Atlantic. It's wild to think about. There was a design like message board at the time. This is probably like 2010, where somebody said, "Hey, I work for a magazine in New York and I'm looking for interns." And I was like, "Hi." And I went out to New York simply to see this guy for an interview for an internship, an unpaid internship at the time. I wasn't in school either, which now that's like not legal. And I got it and it was unpaid. So I had to move to New York. I worked at Starbucks at the time for health insurance. And I worked there full time while I also worked at this internship. And I lived in a hostel in Bed-Stuy that shortly after I left was shut down. And I just like, at the time, I just applied to any and every publishing job that I saw, even if it wasn't even remotely what I wanted to do. And while I was in New York for those, I think it was like 3 months, I got another internship at a different publishing company, and that was in marketing design. And I just kind of like lived within that world as much as I could. I ended up getting a paid position there as a freelancer. And then from there, I got a job at HarperCollins. The creative director there hired me to be her assistant, and that was really my first like step into what they call the Big Five, which is one of the big publishers. And I worked my way up from there, from being an assistant, which really taught me a lot. I got to see everybody's different role within the company. I got to meet a lot of different people from different departments like sales and marketing and publicity. And I got to work with other designers who were super talented, and I got to get into their files, and which is kind of like visiting someone's closet and seeing how they organize things. So that really, really taught me a lot. And then, yeah, I've just been in that ever since, slowly working my way up, but never with the goal to like lead. I just want to be left alone so I can design. So yeah, that's where I'm at now.
You mentioned things have changed a little and you can't get an unpaid internship unless you're in college. But what would you recommend for people who are interested in getting into this field and don't really have that kind of door in?
I think now, yeah, I was thinking about that earlier. Like it just used to be like, I mean, in my experience, get yourself to New York. Now that, thank goodness, remote and hybrid work is available, companies are able to have much more diverse work staff, and you can live a different life and also work in publishing. I now can have a house and work in publishing, whereas before COVID, I was really tied to office life. So I think now there are college courses, I do believe, that you can take specifically for publishing. And I think that gives a really good bird's eye view of the whole publishing system. It is very complicated. There's so many different departments that you can work within in publishing. I would just say talk to as many people as you can, meet as many people as you can. I know so many designers have their portfolios out there online, like send emails. I get emails from artists a lot, and a lot of times I hire those artists for covers, and I wouldn't have known about them unless they emailed me and was like, here's my portfolio. So I would just say, like, try to meet people in any way that you can, even if it's online, and just try to share and be within that world, which now is online or in person. I know the Society of Illustrators is in New York, but I feel like every city has a lot of like good creative spaces where you can go and meet people. And I don't want to say network because I think that's a smarmy word, but just talk to people who have the same interests as what you want to get into, I would say.
What is the coolest project you've ever worked on?
Oh man, it's so tough. That's like having a favorite child. I think because every project is so different, like it all boils down to the process, not even necessarily like the final product, because sometimes the final product is really far from what I've hoped and planned for it to be, which it has to always ebb and flow and change because you're working with so many people. And ultimately, you're working for a client, which is the publisher, the publishing team, the author, the agent, the editor. It's always so different. So there are covers that I wish would have been different, but the process was so lovely. Or covers that I'm really proud of, but the process was really stressful and hard. But I think overall, of everything I've worked on, getting to work on TJ Klune books has been a highlight for me. He's such a lovely person. His stories are heartbreaking but beautiful and just confirm that there's goodness in the world. And I also get to work with a really great artist on all of those covers, which is pretty rare that we've had the same artist for 7 years now, working alongside both of us. And that is Red Nose Studio. He's really talented. He is the one who's building physical sets and then shooting them. I'm working closely with him so that I can put my hand lettering around anything he's built and shot. I would say those are my favorites.
I'm curious now, because you've mentioned hand lettering. How do you decide which projects you're hand lettering on?
Sometimes I know right away. Like with the TJ Clunes, I think there was one time that I used type, but then I even ended up tracing it and changing it a little bit just so it had more of a hand drawn feel to it and texture. And just because what Red Nose Studio does with his work is so tactile and hands-on that I really wanted the lettering to match that vibe. So I would say sometimes it's very early on, I know that. Sometimes it's not until I get final art that I'm like, oh, we need something more specialized to fit within this. It's always different. I would say I know, like, in the process when I'm working with the artist and we're getting sketches and I start really looking into fonts and typefaces that I think like, oh, this isn't feeling right. And then I start to kind of sketch things on my own and work it out that way.
What is the hardest part of your job?
I think the hardest part is that there are so many opinions and people involved in such an important singular image that I think that's the hardest part. It's not a bad thing, but I think the hard part is managing expectations, managing budgets. Like all of this is together. Like there's a budget, we have a timeline expectation, we have a visual expectation. Sometimes what one person wants for this cover is not at all what this other person wants for this cover. So I think it's kind of coming together with everyone and really hashing that out and figuring out ultimately what will work best for the story. I think that's probably the hardest part.
What do you think people misunderstand or get wrong about your job?
A lot of people, when they hear that I'm a book cover designer, they're like, oh, so you do all the art, like you draw all day. And that is not what I do. I'm not an illustrator by any means. I like to draw and doodle, but that is not what I do. I'm the one who's hiring the artists, choosing the artists and pitching them to our team in-house, who then pitches that to the author, the agent, I think that's probably what most people wouldn't know, maybe.
I'm also curious, you were talking about earlier figuring out the different elements, like size wise, like if an author's name would be bigger than the title.
Hmm.
I'm curious about pull quotes because they come in pretty late in the process, or do you have them early on?
It's always different. Sometimes we
Okay.
do have them early. A lot of times we do have them early and then they change last minute, which is tricky on our end because we're designing, and a lot of times I'm not even reading the text specifically. I'm looking at letter forms and letter counts. So I'm visually saying, like, well, your quote is way too long. It's not going to fit within the space and the composition that we've ended up with. Or if you do want to fit the whole thing, it's going to be like a 8-point font and it'll be very tiny. There are those books though that quotes come in really early and it's a really good quote from a really respected author and we know it and we can plan for it and then that's it. But they do change a lot.
Do you have any favorite classic book covers?
Oh man, there's so many. I feel like I have so many different things bookmarked and saved. And I think one that stands out that really influenced me early on was The Westing Game by Ellen Raskin, who wrote that book and designed that book herself, which is pretty rare. I read an article that she even designed the margins of that book. So where the text was laying on the page, she designed the margins of that book for a child's grip so that they could hold that book comfortably and read it comfortably. I think that influenced me in many ways, but just like the house made of dollar bills on the front of that cover is so burned into my brain.
Do you have any design pet peeves that you see like in bookshops?
I don't think so because I've been behind the curtain for so long that I know. I saw a quote recently where it was someone who was just starting out in the field was like, "Oh, I can't believe that designer did that." And then years later they figured out like, "No, I can't believe that designer was made to do that." Because we know it's just the process, it's what was wanted at the time by someone involved in the process. I don't think I have any pet peeves. I mean, I know like chasing trends is one that I don't feel inspired by, but I understand the value of it and I understand why it's done. Um, but I think it's kind of cool to be able to look at a cover and say like, oh, that's so 2010, or that's so 70s. I think that's what's kind of cool about what we do. Like it does live in a place and time and sometimes covers get repackaged so it can have many different looks, which is also really cool to see that progression, that change. But pet peeves, I think like kerning, paying attention to kerning, like talking about not being able to unsee something. I think it's that
Can you
when
explain what kerning
letters.
is?
So it's the way that the letters sit in relation to one another. And when you type out something, just slap it on a cover. Sometimes those letters could be like a little bit off. There could be a little too much space in between two specific letter forms, and you really want it all to visually line up so that when you squint your eyes, you're not seeing any like hard, weird breaks in it, or you're not seeing like too much of a space, or you're not seeing letters smashed together in a weird way. It's really just a consistent look between all of the letter forms themselves. Now I can't like ride the subway and look at subway ads and see like an R that's like over here where it should be over here.
That does sound painful. Do you have any favorite types of covers?
I don't. I think when I was coming up in publishing, that was when ebooks were really becoming a thing and e-readers. And at the time, I remember sitting in one of my internships and people saying like print is going to be dead in X amount of years. And I think what's really great that has happened is the book as an object has really regained popularity. Like now we're staining the edges of books. Now we're focusing on the case design under the jacket. We're choosing really beautiful headbands where the binding is like stitched in. I think, yeah, I think that's really exciting. So just generally, the book as an object, I think is my favorite. thing.
I just saw a manga with the end papers had spot gloss on them, just like a little bit. And I was like, I've never seen that before.
That's such a nice touch. Attention to detail like that. Like the use of specs, the use of papers, the use of color and shape even.
Now, this is my last big work-related question, which is, what's your favorite part of your job?
I think my favorite part is getting to meet new people all of the time. I get to meet new artists all the time and pitch them projects that we're going to work on together, which is really fun. And it's always different. So even if I work with an artist more than once, our projects are always wildly different. So it's fun to experience those things with different people and get different views, because I do get to work with people from around the world and see how they would approach something. Even I get to see the background point of their process and see, like, do they do really tight sketches? Do they do super loose sketches that we kind of have to decipher and explain in-house and just trust, which are my favorite kind? Yeah, I think working with artists is my favorite.
That sounds amazing. And where can people find your work online?
My name is Katie Klimowicz. It's a long one. KLIMOWICZ.com. I'm also on Instagram. I believe my name is Katie Jane Klim there. But yeah, that's mainly where I am.
All right. Well, everybody should go check out your work. I certainly will be following it. Thank you so much for your time. And that's it for this week on the Interesting Jobs podcast, where we chat with people with interesting jobs. If you have an interesting job or know someone with one, email us and let us know. We might even be able to have you on the show.